Good afternoon. My name is Philip Bale and I'm an Innovation Low Carbon Networks Engineer for Western Power Distribution. And thank you for inviting me here today to discuss from a DNO's point of view energy storage, large and small. But I'd like to take it slightly wider than that, as the question that I always get asked is how much energy storage is a DNO going to want and where should it be and what size? And unfortunately, I can't give you the answer to that. But hopefully, in this bit that I can lead to, is some of the main factors that we need to look at, that we need to go ahead and need to be solved and need to be considered. One of the first ones is around how much energy storage we like to have. It depends on who owns it, and that's been covered very much earlier this morning. And there again, when it comes to owning it, it's a case of the price versus the benefits versus the alternatives. So as we look at energy storage, we look at it as a solution, often as a black box. And we look at smart grid components, and ultimately what we're trying to do is solve a problem. And if energy storage can do it and we can own it and solve it in that way, it's one of those areas that we could do. One of the other aspects, as was touched on earlier, is whether the sole operator or whether we actually purchase that storage capability from other people. And I'll go on to that more. Currently as it stands, the EU regulations look like it may well preclude us from owning energy storage and getting benefits from other areas, which means it may well have to be owned by a third party and us to get the benefits from there. And as was touched on earlier in Poiries, there are multiple benefits that come from different markets in order to make the cost-benefit analysis more attractive. But one of the things that really has to be looked at is whether those benefits are constructive or destructive. Is the times when a DNO, a retailer, a transmission operator going to rely on that energy storage, is it going to be the same scenarios? Or actually, is a DNO going to be asking people to absorb when a generator is going to be asking them to export? And one of the things that further work needs to be done on. The other aspect about where storage is located and how much and what size and what megawatt, megawatt hour, kilowatt hour, is what's the problem we're trying to solve with storage? And people often approach it and say, there's benefits to the DNO, but there's wide-ranging benefits and different problems that need to be solved. One extreme is having a large generator on a relatively weak network with insufficient demand to absorb that generation, causing voltage rise during the times of low demand. So a solution with energy storage would call for a relatively low amount of power, charge-discharge, but a long amount of storage capacity. Right at the other end, you could well have an inertia stability issue at grid level, but it makes more sense to connect it at distribution level. So very high power output, a kilowatt megawatt output, but very short duration. Both completely different technologies, completely different aspects. And when it comes to that, I'd implore energy storage developers, system integrators to come and speak to us and say, as you're moving forwards into ED1 and into Rio, what are your problems? What characteristics does our energy storage have to provide? The other one is, where do you install it? One centralised unit, distributed units everywhere. And as a broad rule of thumb, it doesn't really matter to us if you consider power. Because actually if you take lots of small distributed energy and put it in lots of different locations, they will all aggregate up. Ultimately to us, it comes as a black box. It's what's the cost versus the benefits. The more distributed it is, the more benefits you can have through the whole system. If it's on the LV network, you can get the benefits on the LV circuits, on the transformers, the 11 kV network, the transformers, right the way up into the primary, and if you had enough of it, right the way up into the grid element. But ultimately, if it costs you so much more and the benefits aren't worth it, it won't be a solution that we'll be able to utilise, as we have to go with what is the lowest cost solution. However, also to consider is it's not just watts and real power. But with a lot of the energy storage devices that have been talked about, they also produce reactive power and VARs. And that's something that as a DNO we can utilise to better operate our network. And if you install it as a centralised unit, you'll get much more operation out of the reactive power, whereas if you have lots of small distributed units, that reactive power won't travel and won't provide the benefits where perhaps you need it. And another element that needs to be considered. There's lots of other fringe benefits that could come from energy storage, and there again I suggest coming and speaking to the network operators. Things like phase balancing. Harmonic reduction, whether it's done passively through filtering attached to batteries, whether it's done with active harmonic reduction at that same time, is other benefits, other solutions that could be used to reduce the problems that we have. It may well be that we actually ask you to increase your fault level during different times and have active fault level contribution. If National Grid's fault level drops considerably, ours will as well. And actually, whilst a low fault level is good, too low is actually more difficult. And there again, reactive compensation, and also the option of reduction in losses. So obviously, system efficiency, as well as the losses that occur on our network with power coming right the way through and pushing back the other way. So ultimately, when it comes to energy storage, and my view about where it should be, how much, what size, it really does depend on a lot of different factors, but also the success of other smart grid solutions, as we are relatively technology agnostic. What we look at is problems and what's the most effective solution based on capital cost, OPEX, reliability, and also safety. And obviously we've discussed cost an awful lot here already, and I agree with everyone that cost has to come down to a certain level. But as a DNO, having a network that if it was to rely on energy storage, it has to be reliable. We have to be able to call on it when we need it, and it has to be there. But also it has to be fundamentally safe. We're used to dealing with systems which are out there, which will have a very high reliability and are safe for our people to work with. Because it is a new technology, a new integrator into the system, we need to be very sure about how we install, operate, maintain, and decommission that unit, that storage safely, whatever the technology type it is. Thank you very much.